I'm a parent. I do work for Guilford County Schools. I work in the Exceptional Children's Department. But what qualifies me for my position is that I've walked where you're walking. I have 5 children. 3 of my children have had IEPs, and they all looked very different in the school system. My oldest child was diagnosed with ADHD and had a specific learning disability in reading. My second child was diagnosed with ADHD and oppositional defiant disorder as a child. Didn't quite look the same as my oldest. Ended up being diagnosed with a mood disorder as he was older. I can promise you that he was my behavioral child. So I learned the process dealing with behavioral discipline issues with him. And then my stepson, who I got custody of when he was 10, has Down syndrome and autism and is eligible under MU or multiple disabilities. He is 24 now. They've all aged out of the system or graduated. He's 24 now and functions at that of a 6-month-old. So he's quite heavily involved. So I've kind of walked this walk through different paths. So I kind of have a broad knowledge. I'm going to try to keep this as basic as I can. I do still get a lot of phone calls, which is why I approached Lindsay. People don't even know what an IEP is. So this is really what I'm going to focus on. I am willing to do more advanced training for those that want it. But I apologize if some of this stuff is, you know, very basic for you.
What is an IEP?
An IEP is an Individualized Education Plan. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, we'll get to that. So it's not very clear, but this is the mission of Guilford County Schools, and Guilford County students will graduate as responsible citizens prepared to succeed in higher education or in the career of their choice. The content that we're going to review is just a basic introduction, background on key laws that support students with disabilities, 6 main elements of IEDEA, services and accommodations and modifications. So what's the big idea? The big idea is essentially what do we need to know to improve outcomes for students with disabilities, and that includes, of course, all students with disabilities. This is something that hangs in our office at the EC department. It's something that we talk a lot about. Fair is not always equal. It's fair is essentially everyone getting what they need. And so here's Education for All Handicapped Children Act in 1975. It's actually PL 94-146, I don't remember exactly. So why? Children with disabilities were often excluded from schools and were not guaranteed protections and access prior to 1975 and even later. So in 1990, the Congress reauthorized the EAHCA and changed the title to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, Public Law number 94-142. So overall, the goal of IDEA is to provide children with disabilities the same opportunity for education as those students who do not have a disability. The most recent amendment took place in 2004, and the final regs were published in 2006. So before these laws were put in place, the educational needs of millions of children were not being met. Children were excluded from the public school system, and undiagnosed disabilities prevented the children from having a successful educational experience. And the lack of adequate resources within the public school system forced families to find services outside or go without. So IDEA, the basic tenets are it's a federal law that ensures services to children with disabilities throughout the nation. It governs how states and public agencies provide early intervention, special education, and related service to more than 6.5 million eligible infants, toddlers, children, and youth with disabilities. So if it's an infant or toddler, so under the age of 2, they receive early intervention services under IDEA Part C. Children and youth ages 3 to 21 receive special education and related services under IDEA Part B. So if you're ever researching the law, those are the parts that you're going to look under depending on the age of your child. So part of the law includes Project Child Find, and that just essentially says that it's the school district's responsibility to locate and identify children and youth ages birth through 21 with disabilities who are in need of special education and related services. So the children are youth who have been diagnosed or are suspected to have an intellectual, physical, or emotional disability, or are unable to benefit from a regular school program without special assistance. What help is available? A complete evaluation, if it's appropriate, and an IEP or IFSP, if appropriate. An IFSP is in the early ages. So this is just some GCS data. This is based on December 1, 2016 child count. There were 73,614 students total in Guilford County schools. 10,113 of those students were students with disabilities, and that's 13.72% identified as EC. So roughly 1 in 7 students in Guilford County schools are identified as being a student with a disability. So the purpose of IDEA is to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them a free and appropriate public education, or FAPE. I don't know if you've all heard that term, but that's what FAPE stands for, free and appropriate public education. Services are designed to meet their unique needs and to prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. So IDEA findings are disability is a natural part of the human experience and in no way diminishes the right of individuals to participate in or contribute to society. High expectations for all students, improving educational results for children with disabilities is an essential element of our national policy. So IDEA is federal law. North Carolina interpretation of IDEA is in this policy manual. You can find this manual on the NC DPI website. It's called Policies Governing Services for Children with Disabilities. If you want to email me, I'll send you the direct link, so you don't even have to Google it. But if you Google North Carolina Policies Governing Services for Children with Disabilities, you will get this information. And they were last amended in July of 2014. So, and this is procedural safeguards. If you have a child with an IEP that receives services in the schools, you should be getting a copy of this at every IEP meeting. If you're not, then please let us know. You do have the right to tell them to keep it, because after having 3 children with IEPs, I could probably wallpaper every wall in my house with these policies. So, you know, it just comes a point in time where you want to save some trees. Here is the link to the procedural safeguards. Procedural safeguards are designed to protect the rights of children with disabilities and their families, and to ensure that children with disabilities receive FAPE, free appropriate public education, informed consent, opportunity for parents to review and have access to their child's full educational records, parent participation and what that means in meetings regarding placement and educational decisions, prior written notice and what that means, your notice of procedural safeguards, and the resolution process. So if you feel that the school district is not doing its due diligence or doing things that aren't right, you do have some remedies within the law, and that is in the procedural safeguards. If you want to know what those procedures are, give me a call and I will tell you exactly what page and paragraph those things are on. Now FERPA, that's another law. and it's the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And that is for all students, regardless of whether they have an IEP or not. So it's the right to inspect and review any and all records that the district keeps. You can request corrections to those records. And you have the right to consent to disclosure of personally identifiable information contained in those educational records. So you can essentially determine who can see them. So Section 504, I'm just going to kind of briefly go over because sometimes children who have a disability don't necessarily meet eligibility criteria for an IEP, but they do under Section 504. And the purpose is to eliminate discrimination on the basis of a handicap in any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. It protects students with a disability that impairs one or more major life activities. Major life activities is actually described and defined quite clearly in the law, and we can find that. If you want that information, email me and I'll give you all that. It's a very lengthy definition, and it is different from IEP. It provides accommodations to remove discriminatory barriers. So we see a lot of students that have anxiety, some students with ADHD, some students with autism, some students with like allergies or, generally if they have SLD, they would get services under an IEP. This is essentially for kids who don't need specially designed instruction, but require some accommodations to their school day. So the 504 plan removes the barriers to learning and educational opportunity, and those regs are here. I will get you that information too if you want to email me and say, hey, send me that link so I can look at it. I have not a problem emailing you anything you need to know. So this is an activity that was in here, and I'm not going to go ask you to do an activity, but I really thought that the question was kind of pertinent, that maybe we needed to just kind of go over. And this is a presentation that was done with teachers too. So does the eligibility or disability type determine where and what services a child will receive? Does anybody want to just kind of say what they think?
Yes, does the eligibility or disability type determines where and what services? Yes, it does. Because in this paper it stated.
No, let me explain. I have a child with autism, I have a grandson with autism, and I have a nephew with autism. If you looked at the three of them together and separately, they have very different and unique needs.
Yes.
So their services would not be determined by their label, because if all children with autism got the same services, one of them wouldn't get what they needed or would get more than they needed. So the main elements of IDEA. So IDEA is composed of the 6 main elements being IEP, Individualized Education Plan, program, free and appropriate public education, FAPE, least restrictive environment, which is LRE, appropriate evaluation, parent and teacher participation, and procedural safeguards. The IEP, the centerpiece of IDEA, is the IEP for each student who is found to be eligible under both the federal and/or state eligibility or / disability standards. A personalized plan that directs the child's education, which is what an IEP is. It specifies goals and a description of the services that they'll be provided to enable the student to accomplish those goals, and it provides access to general education to the maximum extent appropriate. It describes the student's present level of performance and how the student's disabilities affect the academic performance. It specifies accommodations and modifications to be provided for the student, and it's a legal document that holds the school accountable for providing educational services that are likely to enable the child to progress in the general education curriculum. So each child with a disability who qualifies for special education or related services is entitled to an IEP. And we have to all remember and make sure that our school staff remembers that the I stands for individualized. The IEP team. If the child is found eligible, the IEP team consists of the parent or guardian, at least one regular education teacher, a special education teacher, someone who can interpret the educational implications of the evaluation, such as a school psychologist or anybody else that might fit that category. Related service personnel, whether it's appropriate or necessary. If your child does not need speech therapy services, then a speech therapist will not be part of the IEP team. A representative whose adequate knowledge of the availability of services and authority to commit to those services, that's usually the principal. And the student, if the child, beginning at age 14, if it's appropriate. I served as a surrogate parent in the district for several years before I came into my position. And you know, some of those kids were really had some significant emotional difficulties, and sometimes it just wasn't appropriate for them to be there for the entire IEP. But we included them as much as we could when we could. So the team collaborates to write the IEP. So everybody works together. Everybody has the same equal input. Transition component of IEP. It's results-oriented, coordinated sets of activities for a child with a disability beginning at the age of 14. So in that component, the transition component of the IEP, they focus on improving academic and functional achievement and facilitate the child's movement from school to post-school activities. So you should see in there things like post-secondary education, vocational education, integrated employment, continuing and adult education, adult services, independent living, community participation, what you're going to do in order to get that student to accomplish those goals or whichever of those goals that they hope to. So, a free and appropriate public education. It's defined as special education and related services that are provided without charge under public supervision and direction of the school system and in conformity with the Individualized Education Program. To provide FAPE, schools must provide students with an education that emphasizes special education and related services. It's designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living with access to the general curriculum. Just remember, general curriculum to meet challenging expectations and result in educational benefit to the child. So these are all three things that we should be working toward. Least restrictive environment. So the IDEA regulations state, to the maximum extent appropriate, these are real big words now, children with disabilities, including children in public or private institutions, are educated with children who are non-disabled to the maximum extent appropriate. So that doesn't mean that every child will get put into a general ed placement. It really depends on what's appropriate. Removal of children with disabilities from a regular educational environment occurs only if the nature or severity of the disability is such that education in regular classes with the use of supplementary aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily. Simply put, the LRE is the environment most like that of typical children in which the child with a disability can succeed academically. Appropriate evaluation. So this is all something that we should make note of too. Children identified with a disability and who receive special education services must go through an evaluation process. The goal of IDEA's regulations for evaluation is to minimize the number of misidentifications, and it happens a lot, provide a variety of assessment tools and strategies, prohibit the use of any single evaluation as the sole criterion of which a student is placed in special education services, and provide protections against evaluation measures that are racially or culturally discriminatory. So overall, the goal of appropriate evaluation is to get students who need help the the extra help that is appropriate for the student and that helps the specific student to reach his or her goals set by the IEP team. So you wouldn't just do an autism evaluation if you suspect a learning disability, specific learning disability. It really would need to be appropriate. So access to education via IDEA. So the concern is parent or guardian or teacher thinks a child is struggling to learn. The next step would be to refer to special education, most cases. But prior to referral to special education, sometimes a process is begun through the school's regular education IST team. Sometimes the child just needs some modifications or some assistance short term to accomplish his goals to get on track. It could be something very simple. So we wouldn't necessarily refer that child to special education if it's not necessary. So EC is represented on the IST team, but this is an initiative through regular education, not special education. So if the intervention data collected by the IST indicates the need for a referral, the IEP team will convene to complete the referral process. The team will determine which, if any, additional assessments need to be conducted. The team must obtain the parent's informed consent to conduct the evaluations. So if a teacher believes that your child has a disability, she can make the initial referral, but no evaluations can be completed without your consent. So once that process is completed, the team reconvenes to determine if the student is eligible for special education services. And there's a three-pronged basis for eligibility. So they have to meet the need, the criteria for one or more of the 14 areas of disability, and we'll get to them. Also, a documented evidence of adverse impact on educational performance and documented evidence that student is in need of specially designed instruction. So the determination is not the result of a lack of appropriate instruction in reading, including essential components of reading instruction. So if the child hasn't been taught to read, but they're not reading, then we wouldn't necessarily say that they have a disability in reading because they haven't been taught to read. The same thing for instruction in math. So it would be that it's also not the result of a lack of appropriate instruction in math. And also, if the child is of limited English proficiency, that would not make them eligible for EC services if they are not receiving education related or in a language that they understand. So these are the 14 areas of disability in North Carolina. There's autism, emotional disability, orthopedic impairment, deaf blindness, hearing impairment, other health impairment, traumatic brain injury, visual impairment, learning disability, intellectual disability, deafness, developmental delay, multiple disabilities, and speech language impairment. So here, this is broken down for you. So in the 10,113 students that were identified in 16-17 school year, you can see that 4,093 had a specific learning disability. So that would be the #1 eligibility category. #2 would be speech language impaired, which is 1,574. Other health impairment, which is a lot where you see ADHD fall a lot, that's 1,464. And then autism is 4th with 1,168. And then it goes from there. But, and that is falls right in line with the national statistics as well. It's the same thing. Most students are identified with a specific learning disability, then speech, then OHI, and then autism. So parent and teacher participation, and this is where it gets good. A good family professional partnership is a key for a student to receive the education necessary for success. Parents and teachers really need to be willing to work together and communicate to determine the ways of working with the student. I'm just going to say this. I have been Like I said, I have three kids that have had IEPs, and I have been the uninformed parent, I have been the mostly informed parent, and then I've been the bulldog parent that, you know, was quite aggressive. And then I came full circle and I realized I really wasn't getting anywhere. Being the bulldog, I kind of was disrespected, or I felt disrespected. I felt like I wasn't being listened to. And I really think that they try to push me out of the school as much as possible. So I participated in several different trainings, and one of them being, I can't even remember what it is right now, but it's program that's run by the state, and if you leave me your email address, I'll get you that, Partners in Policymaking. So came back around and I realized that if I just kind of did things slightly different, I can get a whole lot more accomplished for my child. Because, you know, honestly, when parents and teachers or parents and school personnel are going at each other, the only people that really lose is the student. So we really want to work hard to do that. And if you get to the point where you're really starting to lose your cool, you can stop the meeting, take a break, walk out of the room. If you feel like your blood pressure is just way too high, that you need to reschedule the meeting for another time, that's fine. Or if you feel that just dealing with the school in a certain situation is really becoming difficult, give me a call and I will give you some suggestions on how to bring it back. So both the family and the school/teachers work together on the IEP team to determine goals, the least restrictive environment, and to discuss other important considerations for each individual student. And throughout the whole IEP and special education process, parents and families should be updated and kept informed of any decisions made about their specific student. So services. High expectations for all students with disabilities. Services are based on the very unique, special, and individualized needs of the student. Thus, services may look very different from one child with a disability compared to another, and that's where the comparison with my child versus my grandson and my nephew, who all have autism but look very different. Specially designed instruction. So specially designed instruction is defined as adaptations to the content, methodology, and the delivery of instruction that addresses the unique needs of a child that result from the child's disability, ensures access to the general education curriculum so that the child can meet the educational standards that apply to all children. And they're guaranteed by IDEA and implemented in accordance with the individual educational plan process. Least restrictive environment. As we recognize the unique, special, and individualized needs of the child, we also support the child being educated in the least restrictive environment, which includes, but not limited to, general education classrooms, pull-out resource classrooms for portions of the day, separate settings in traditional schools, public separate schools for students with disabilities, which would be the Gateway, the Haynes-Inman, Herb & Metz, and C.J. Green. On the North Carolina Extended Content Standards, Adapted Curriculum, or the General Curriculum. We maintain high expectations for all students with disabilities, and we know all students can learn. Related services are essentially anything that the child needs throughout the day to get him through his school day, so to assist him to benefit from special education. Those things can and do at times include transportation, audiology, counseling, interpreting services, occupational therapy, speech therapy, physical therapy, on and on. And it's not just this list is not all there is. This is just a quick graphic that explains the differences in curriculums. The adapted curriculum is really going to be the students, they're always going to be in a separate placement, usually, and not all, but usually they're pretty significantly disabled. So, but they are receiving like social skills, community-based instruction, PE and cultural arts. Their focus is going to be mainly on functional skills like daily living skills and communication skills, some self-advocacy skills, and it'll maximize independence. But then in the general curriculum, that's going to be most of our students. In fact, a lot of our students, almost all of them, are going to be on a diploma track, whether it be Future Ready Core or OCS. And they can all be served in either a regular ed setting, a resource setting, or separate placement. So just because a child is in a separate placement does not mean that they are in the adapted curriculum. This is just an overview of the teaching and learning standards. I don't know much about the standards other than that this is what they are. There are the foundations for early learning and development, and that's used in infant, toddlers, and preschooler levels. There's the standard course of study, which is what most of our students are graduating with. There's the occupational course of study, and they're adopted from the Common Core standards, specifically for high school students that receive EC services in the OCS pathway. And then the extended content standards, and those are the students with real significant cognitive disabilities and on the adapted curriculum. So this is just some explanation about what those standards look like. I'm not going to go through each and every one of them. Some of them that you might need to know are occupational course of study. It's intended for students who function below age and grade level expectations. They're considered, helps schools identify the characteristics of students who may need the OCS pathway. And the resources about OCS is available at that link. It's a program that kids are participating in work, study, essentially, while in school. The extended content standards teaches students with significant cognitive disabilities, teach adaptive curriculum, and implements the NC Extend 1. And that website there at that link will give you more information. So IEPs are supposed to link to the standards. So that means using the standards alone, it does not mean using the standards alone to determine the goals, or assuming that every student will work only on grade level content or standards. But it does mean referring to standards to determine grade level expectations, using the standards as a guide to determine what the student is expected to know or do, or connecting to the curriculum at an appropriate level and ensuring specially designed instruction to meet the student's needs. The last piece of that is the behavior intervention plan. That's something that two of my children have had pretty much over the course of their school experience. The emphasis is on positive behavioral interventions for students with some behavioral difficulties. And it could be, one of my children was self-injurious. So they used the behavior intervention plan for that too. It wasn't just that he was flipping tables or anything like that. IEP teams determine if a child needs a behavior intervention plan or BIP. A functional behavioral assessment is done prior to a BIP. It's an FBA, and it helps develop a strong BIP. So if that assessment is not done prior to developing a BIP, we no idea if it's going to meet the needs of the student. And IEP team members must explore strategies and positive supports to address any behavior that is impeding the learning of the student or his or her peers. Behavior IEPs or BIPs must be followed by general and special education staff. So accommodations and modifications. So essentially this is what an accommodation looks like. The squirrel is obviously way too small to lift that soda bottle to his mouth to drink it like you or I would. So if we just put the straw in there, they can drink the soda, same soda, just the same. So it's appropriate arrangement that allows for access to the same information and activities. It's based on the individual strengths and needs. It does not substantially change instructional level or content. There are methods used that alter the academic setting or environment so students can easily access information. So these are just some examples. These are not a total list, and that includes like extended time, large print, braille, signed instruction, checklists, and so on and so forth. Modifications look like this. So the child would not have to jump the hurdle like everybody. They would get a modified hurdle. So it essentially changes the performance expectations for that student and what they learn. So they're not expected to master the same academic content as others in the classroom. Very briefly, Doe versus Withers, if you're not familiar with it, the court ruled the school system had to pay funds when the child's history teacher refused to allow the IEP, to follow the IEP, and allow the student to take his exams orally and untimed. So you should know that if teachers do not follow their accommodations, modifications, responsibilities, there is precedence. These are just some resources that the EC department likes to refer to and use.